My wife texted, "I just inherited millions. Pack your things. Get out of my house." I smiled and replied, "I have a voice memo of you and your ex cheating." She froze and rushed home. Let me tell you how we got here. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. My name is Turner Williams. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, the third son of a postal worker and a church organist who made music out of nothing, literally and financially. We never had much. I wore my older brother's shoes until the soles separated, and I learned to hold them together with electrical tape. I did not grow up bitter about that. I grew up paying attention. There is a difference between a man who resents what he didn't have and a man who studies it so he never has to feel again. My mother made sure I was the second kind. I put myself through 2 years of community college doing HVAC repair on weekends, which is not glamorous work, but it is honest work, and honest work done well has a way of compounding. I dropped out when my mother's diabetes got bad and the medical bills started arriving in batches. I did not drop out feeling sorry for myself. I dropped out with a plan. By 26, I had a small business. By 30, I had 4 employees and a commercial contract with an office park in Gwinnett County that paid better than anything I had imagined at 22. I was not wealthy, but I was solid. And I had started doing something at 24 that nobody around me was doing. I was quietly putting money into index funds and private real estate notes through an LLC I called Steadfast Property Solutions, and I never told anyone about it because my mother always said that talking about money is how you lose it. I believed her more than she probably intended me to. Trina came into my life at 27. I met her at a mutual friend's cookout in East Atlanta. She walked in wearing a yellow dress and carrying herself the way women carry themselves when they have been taught that presence is power. She was beautiful and sharp, and she made me laugh within the first 10 minutes, which is not easy to do. What I did not know then, and would not fully understand for years, was that Trina came from a family that had once had real money and had spent every year since performing as though they still did. Her father, Desmond, had inherited a real estate portfolio from his own father and run it into the ground through bad partnerships and worse gambling. By the time Trina was in college, there was nothing left except the name and the posture. She was good at the posture. We married when she was 28 and I was 29. My uncle Harold, who had been through a divorce that cost him nearly everything, pulled me aside 2 months before the wedding and said, "Son, I love you. Get a prenup." I listened. Trina was offended at first. She called it unromantic, said it felt like I was planning to leave before we had even started. I told her a prenup works both ways and that I was not planning anything except protecting both of us. After 2 hard conversations, she signed it. I do not think she read it carefully. I know she did not read it carefully, because if she had, she would have remembered that the house, the one she just told me to get out of, was purchased with money I had saved and borrowed before she was ever in the picture. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For 6 years, I paid the mortgage, kept the lights on, took her on 2 vacations a year because she said travel was important, and I did not complain about any of it. I believed then what I still believe, that a quiet man who shows up is worth more than a loud man who promises. I showed up every morning. I came home with my boots dirty and my hands tired, and I made dinner when she was exhausted from her marketing job, and I drove my mother to her doctor appointments twice a month, and I did not ask for a medal for any of it, because that is not why I did it. My mother, Yvette Williams, was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 3 years into our marriage. Trina offered to help at first. Then she got busy, and she stopped mentioning my mother unless I brought her up, and eventually even that stopped. I handled it. I always handled it. But I want you to understand something. My mother, even in the early confusion of that disease, was one of the sharpest readers of people I have ever known. And 2 years ago, during one of her clear stretches, she sat me down at her kitchen table and told me she had seen Trina's car parked outside a restaurant on Ponce de Leon on a Tuesday afternoon last spring. She said Trina was sitting at a window table with a man she did not recognize. She said the man had his hand on top of Trina's hand. My mother looked at me across that table and said, "I'm sorry, baby." I squeezed her hand and told her not to be sorry. Then I went home and started paying closer attention. I had a friend named Dex Calloway who had known me since high school, stood beside me at my wedding, and had been trying to tell me something for almost 2 years without ever actually saying it. He would start sentences and stop them. He'd say things like, "Man, something just feels off lately," and then change the subject before I could press. What I know now is that Dex had seen Trina at a rooftop event in Midtown with a man named Brendan Holt, a name I had mentioned years ago when Trina and I were new and I was learning her history. Brendan was her college boyfriend, the one who always had the look she had said once of a man going somewhere. He was now a real estate developer in Buckhead who drove a white Range Rover and texted Trina on her birthday every year. I know this because I had seen one of those texts light up her phone face up on the nightstand one Saturday morning while she was in the shower, and I had read it, and what it said was not what you write to someone you used to know. I set the phone back down. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I sat with it. One evening over wings, about 2 weeks after I found the text, Dex said something that sounded like small talk, but wasn't. He said, "Man, you should back up your important stuff. Texts, voice memos, whatever. You just never know." He looked at me when he said it. I looked back. That was the whole conversation. I backed up everything the following week, and I set up the small digital voice recorder, the same one I used for dictating work orders in the kitchen because I had a feeling conversation was coming and I wanted to be ready. 3 weeks later, Trina had a phone call in the living room on a Tuesday night while she thought I was asleep. I was not asleep. I heard enough to know that what my mother had seen across a restaurant window was not a coincidence and was not nothing. I heard Brendan's name leave her mouth in a tone I had never heard her use with me. I heard her laugh the way people laugh when they feel completely safe and unwatched. I heard 31 minutes of it. The recorder caught all of it. I saved the file in a folder on my laptop labeled HVAC Estimates Fall. Our son Caleb was 6 at the time. He is 7 now. He is quiet and observant the way children get when they grow up feeling the temperature of rooms that adults think they don't notice. 3 months ago, on a Saturday morning, he came to me while Trina was out and said in the flat, matter-of-fact way that children deliver devastation. "Daddy, Mommy's friend with a white car came to the house when you were at work. She made me go to my room and play with my tablet." I kept my face still. I asked him what the man's name was. He said, he told me to call him Uncle Bren. I took Caleb to get ice cream. I said nothing else about it. The following week, I sat quietly with a family attorney. Not to file anything, just to understand my position regarding Caleb, if things moved in the direction they were clearly moving. I also pulled out the prenuptial agreement and read through it again, slowly, the way I read every contract, looking at every clause and what it protected and what it did not. I already knew what it said. I just wanted to be certain. 7 months after I saved that recording, Trina's great-aunt Laurel passed away in Savannah. Laurel, Simone Okafor-Briggs. Trina had visited her exactly twice in her adult life. Laurel was the kind of woman who lived quietly, accumulated carefully, and told almost nobody her business, which meant that the size of her estate surprised everyone who had underestimated her, which was most of the family. The estate was worth $4.3 million in total. It was split between 3 relatives. Trina was one of them. What Trina heard in that attorney's office in Savannah was the headline number. What she did not yet know, because estate attorneys do not always lead with the complications, was that there was a disputed title claim on a Savannah property from a cousin contesting the will. There was a brokerage account with named beneficiaries that did not include Trina, and there was a clause restricting the sale of a Midtown Atlanta property for 3 years. Trina's actual liquid, accessible inheritance, once the legal fees and disputes and restrictions resolved, was going to land somewhere around $400,000. Real money, but not the kind of money you send a parking lot text about. She walked out of that office, and she felt powerful. I understand that. I am not without empathy for what she must have felt in that moment. The daughter of a man who had lost everything, suddenly holding what felt like restoration. I understand the rush of it. What I cannot understand is what she chose to do with it. She texted me, "I just inherited millions. Pack your things. Get out of my house." I read it twice. I set my phone on my workbench. I looked at the ceiling for about 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds, I thought about my mother at her kitchen table, saying, "I'm sorry, baby." I thought about Caleb saying, "Uncle Bran." I thought about Dex and his wings and his indirect warning. I thought about the prenup she had not read carefully enough, and the LLC she did not know existed, and the folder on my laptop labeled HVAC estimates fall. I thought about 31 minutes of a phone call I had never brought up, that I had carried quietly for over a year, that I had never once used as a weapon because I had hoped, in the way that men who still love their wives hope, even when they probably shouldn't, that it would never come to this. It had come to this. I picked up my phone and I typed, "I have a voice memo of you and your ex cheating." I hit send. I put the phone face down on the workbench. I went to the kitchen and put a pot of coffee on. I called Dex. He picked up on the second ring. I read in the text. There was a long pause on his end. Then he said, "You ready?" I said, "I was ready 9 months ago." I hung up. I heard her car in the driveway 41 minutes later. She had driven from Savannah in what should have been a 3-hour drive. I did not want to think about how she had done that in 41 minutes. I heard her heels on the front porch, quick, and then stopping. She knocked. She still had a key. She knocked anyway. I opened the door. She looked the way I had never seen her look in 8 years of knowing her, stripped of the posture. All of it gone. Her eyes were searching my face for something, and I could see her running calculations behind them, trying to figure out what I had, how I had it, how long I had known. I stepped aside and let her in. I had Caleb at my mother's house. I had made that arrangement 2 hours earlier, before I had even replied to her text, because I knew that whatever this conversation was going to be, it was not a conversation a 7-year-old should hear. She stood in the middle of the living room. I went to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. She did not take hers. She said, "What voice memo?" "Turner, what are you talking about?" Her voice was trying to be steady and not entirely succeeding. I pulled out my phone. I opened a folder labeled HVAC estimates fall. I found a file dated 14 months ago. I pressed play. I let it go for 12 seconds. Then I stopped it. She sat down on the couch as though her legs had decided for her. She sat and she looked at the floor, and the room was very quiet except for the refrigerator running in the kitchen and a car passing outside. I sat down across from her, not beside her, and I set my phone on the coffee table between us face up. I put a yellow legal pad next to it, the same one I've been making notes on for the past week. I said, "Caleb's at my mother's. We're going to talk about him first before we talk about anything else." She looked at the notepad. Her face shifted in a way I had not seen before. Not guilt exactly, not fear exactly, but something that had elements of both. I told her what Caleb had told me 3 months ago. I watched her face while I said it. She did not deny it. She closed her eyes. Then I told her I had been to see a family attorney. Not to start anything, just to understand. I told her I had reread the prenuptial agreement she had signed 7 years ago, and that I wanted her to do the same before anyone mentioned lawyers or houses or money again. I slid a copy of it across the coffee table. I had printed it the day before. Then I told her the things she had not considered when she sat in that parking lot feeling powerful. I told her I had been investing quietly since I was 24. I told her about Steadfast Property Solutions. I told her the approximate figure sitting in accounts and equity and notes. I told her none of it softly, not to wound her, but because she had made a decision in a parking lot based on a set of assumptions about who I was and what I had, and those assumptions were wrong, and she deserved to know they were wrong. She looked at me for a long time. Then I told her the last thing. I told her I had been to see an estate attorney friend of mine, professionally 2 days after Laurel's funeral, because I knew estates were complicated and I wanted to understand what she was actually inheriting before any of it changed the temperature between us. I walked her through the disputed property. I walked her through the brokerage account with the excluded beneficiaries. I walked her through the 3-year sale restriction on the Midtown property. I walked her through what $1.9 million looks like after title disputes and legal fees and restricted assets. I told her the real number was closer to $400,000. She looked at me. She said, "How do you know all of this?" I said, "Because I read things carefully, Trina. I always have." The room was quiet again. She had both hands around the coffee mug now, the one she had not wanted, the one she had picked up without realizing it somewhere in the middle of my talking. She was looking at the legal pad. She was looking at the prenup. She was looking at a man she had been married to for 6 years, and I do not think she was seeing the same man she thought she had married. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. There is something past anger in me, something quieter and more final, but it was not the hot kind of feeling that makes men say things they regret. I had 14 months to feel the hot kind. It had cooled into something else. I said, I'm not going anywhere tonight. Caleb comes home tomorrow morning, and he is going to see two parents who are handling their business like adults. Whatever comes after that, we figure out together or we figure out separately with attorneys. But tonight, you're going to sit here and you're going to talk to me for real. For the first time in a long time. She looked up at me. Her eyes were full. She said, Turner. I said, I know. And we sat there in that quiet house with the coffee going cold between us and the legal pad on the table and 14 months of a secret that had finally finished being a secret. And outside a car passed and the refrigerator ran and somewhere across town our son was asleep at his grandmother's house. And the whole weight of what we had built together and what we had broken together sat in that room with us like a third person neither one of us could ask to leave.